So, at the very heart of this whole shift is this one repeated threat. The source we're looking at really hammers this home. The idea of a U.S. withdrawal from NATO, well, it's not being dismissed as just talk. Apparently, it's being treated as a very real possibility, and that's forcing America's closest allies to start making calculations they probably haven't had to think about in decades.
And that, of course, raises the central question we're going to explore, based on the source material. How are world leaders actually reacting to this? I mean, are they just sitting on their hands, or are they already making moves? Let's see. Okay, so the first major reaction the source points to is a really loud and clear call for something that's, well, pretty much unprecedented in modern history. We're talking about a unified European army, one that would be totally independent of the United States. And get this, the really striking thing here is the urgency. This isn't some vague 10-year plan. The source highlights this quote from Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and it's framed as a direct, immediate response. He says they're ready to move forward, not in 10 years, but right now, tomorrow. Wow. So what's the thinking behind this push? Well, the rationale presented is basically one of survival and self-reliance. The source suggests that the feeling is if Europe doesn't build its own common defense, its vulnerabilities are just going to be exploited. So this is being framed less like a choice and more like an absolute necessity. Now, this isn't just a general call for an army. The source also gets into a very specific proposal for a new security pact, and this one comes directly from Ukraine's President Zelensky. And here's the crucial point. From his unique and, let's be honest, very difficult vantage point, Zelensky reportedly sees the current setup as just not enough. The source suggests he believes that if the U.S. were to leave NATO, a total, fundamental redesign of European security would be absolutely required. But he doesn't just point out the problem. He apparently proposes a solution. The source says Zelensky has identified these four nations, the UK, Ukraine, Turkey, and Norway, as the potential core of a whole new military power. And his assessment? That this specific combination could create an army even stronger than Russia's, one that could control the seas and secure the continent. That's a bold vision. Okay, so this potential realignment isn't happening in a vacuum. The source points out a whole series of other events that are creating this huge ripple effect, suggesting a much wider global recalibration is underway. And this slide just perfectly illustrates that shift. On the one hand, the source brings up a past meeting where Trump is quoted telling Zelensky, "You don't have the cards right now with us." But then you contrast that with what retired General Ben Hodges says is happening now, that Zelensky is the one who Europe and Middle East nations are going to for help. Talk about a major turn of events. And this isn't just about Europe either. The source also points to the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, actively meeting with Arab nations. And why? Well, reportedly, it's because of a perception that the U.S. security umbrella in the Middle East has absolutely collapsed, leaving this big power vacuum that others are now rushing to fill. You know, this realignment goes beyond just military pacts. The source also dives into France's move toward what's being called technological sovereignty. They're reportedly planning to switch some systems from Microsoft to Linux. This is seen as a clear signal that France wants to reduce its strategic reliance on U.S. tech, not just U.S. military protection. The source also touches on public sentiment, bringing up the massive pro-democracy rallies in Hungary. These protests are pushing back against the country's leader, Viktor Orban, who, the source notes, was publicly endorsed by Trump. So this is presented as yet another front where these old alignments are being seriously challenged.
So when you pull all these different threads together from the source material, what's the bigger picture here? Well, it seems to be painting a picture of a world in a really rapid transition, one that's moving away from the order we've known since World War II.
So let's just quickly recap the core argument being made here. First, Trump's NATO rhetoric is seen as the main catalyst for all this change. Second, European leaders aren't just talking, they're actively planning for defense without the US. Third, new security and even tech alliances are starting to form. And finally, all of this means that US influence is being directly challenged on multiple fronts.
And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to think about. The source makes a pretty strong case that the world is recalibrating. So if the old alliances really are fraying and these new competing security pacts are starting to form, what does that world actually look like? What does that mean for global stability? And that's the provocative thought this analysis leaves us with.